markets have priced in a world to perfection, whereas the world that we're living in now is far from being the perfect world. And in fact, it's a world on the brink of war.
Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Simon Hunt from Simon Hunt Analytics. You can find his work at simon-hunt.com. The last time we spoke was in December, and we spoke about what we thought and what Simon thought was going to happen this year. Of course, we're almost at the halfway mark, so I thought it'd be good to bring Simon on again. Simon, thank you for coming on the channel.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Good to be back.
Yeah, it's nice to see you as well. So today, the day we're speaking today is May 30th, Thursday, and in about half an hour, we've got the preliminary GDP data for the first quarter. Many of you probably remember that the advanced number came out at 1.6. I think it was expected 2.4. So maybe we can start with that, Simon. How you see things going for the economy? I think the last time we spoke, you said you thought we'd be all the G7 countries, the US included, would be in a recession sometime in 2024.
No change. I think it's pretty apparent that the GDP data for last year and for the first quarter of this year was rather overinflated. GDI, which is supposed to be similar to the GDP spending data, only came in for last year at 0.5%. compared to the GDP number of 2.5. And when you look at all the revisions that are taking place in the employment data, we have to be very suspicious of how the published numbers are, how accurate they are. Private surveys are showing a completely different picture, that employment is falling and falling quite sharply, that when you allow retail sales, you deflate them by the CPI numbers, they're not rising, it's falling. And I think that the likelihood is that the Fed won't be cutting rates this year. Inflation is not only going to remain sticky, is going to be rising. Private surveys, such as the Chatwood survey, which surveys 50 different towns and cities, covering a common 500 items that households buy. The last survey is showing you that household inflation is rising in double-digit numbers. And then if you go back to what John Williams of Shadow Government Statistics does, which is taking back the original workings of the CPI before Arthur Burns in the 1970s started playing around with them, which every administration has done since then, he comes up to the same figure. What is real inflation? 12%. So a large sector of the population is actually having a very difficult time. And you can see that in a number of the surveys. And on manufacturing remains in recession. There's in America. In Europe, manufacturing is also in recession, but the services sector has seen a rebound, and I correlate that rebound to the recovery in stock markets. And we have the stock markets probably next month hitting their highs around the world. And when the equity markets start falling, that's going to reverberate on consumer spending. So add to that what's happening in the geopolitical world is by no means encouraging. Markets have priced in a world to perfection, whereas the world that we're living in now is far from being the perfect world. And in fact, it's a world on the brink of war. The likelihood is that the war over Ukraine, which is essentially between NATO and Russia, using Ukraine as the footstool, is very likely to escalate. We know, for instance, that NATO has been pouring military equipment, including missiles, into Poland, that a UK Air Force squadron has been relocated there, and that NATO forces have been pushed into countries surrounding Russia. Are we on the brink of war? Is this a crisis to bring about negotiations that would lead to some form of settlement? Or is it part of America's bigger picture, which they've always had, which has been to dismember Russia to gain control of its natural resources? Then you have the all-embracing strategic alliance that has been built up between Russia and China, partly because of the pressure that America has been pushing on sanctions and military activity against Russia and sanctions against China, and positioning troops, in fact, a platoon of the Green Berets on an island just a couple of kilometers off China's coast on the Kinmen Island, and sending offensive weapons into Taiwan. Then if you look at the Middle East, the war over Gaza is not going to end anytime quickly. There is no way that Israel will accept a two-state solution. And then you have an almost inevitable war going to start against Hezbollah. You've had 60 to 80,000 Israelis have had to leave their homes on the northern border. Effectively, you can argue that Hezbollah has actually taken over those lands. So again, it's very likely that at some point in the none too distant future, Israel will be forced to confront Hezbollah. Will that lead to an expansion in the rest of the Middle East? What was very interesting is when Iran retaliated against Israel from Israel's bombing of Iran's consulate in Damascus. Everybody spoke about the 300-odd drones that Iran fired. Well, they were deliberately slow, low-flying drones that could easily be hit. What was behind them were 4 cruise missiles designed to evade all of Israel's and America's defense systems. And the targets were 4 military targets. They hit each one of them, deliberately not to destroy, but just to send a message, just be careful, we can hit you at any time we want. So what I'm saying is the combination of economic activity slowing globally, or certainly in G7 countries, in the second half of this year, accompanied by sharp falls in equity prices, probably of the order of 40% by the early months of 2025, together with wars escalating, either in only Europe or also the Middle East, and even around China. China recently, last weekend, had a huge mock blockade of the island exercise, which was both sea and air. And very interestingly, after the exercise, a Chinese military expert speaking on Chinese television said the following: "This exercise introduced a new mode representing another creative real combat by the PLA. Taiwan is an isolated island, suspended in the sea with weak self-sufficiency. The economy is export-orientated, and most of its energy consumption relies on imports. Once besieged and blockaded, it can easily lead to economic collapse. This exercise is focusing on practicing a new mode of blockading Taiwan." So let's start from there. That's a quick overview.
Yeah, and about war and the geopolitical situation, does it I have a couple of questions. One is, does it concern you that the way they're pushing, like poking the Russian bear and maybe also poking the Chinese dragon, that it could lead to something that would be catastrophic, like nuclear? And the second question is, do you think the economies and the stock markets in the West have kept going because they've kept spending? They put that 95 billion through Congress to keep these wars going, like in Ukraine, Israel, and even Taiwan. They send them some billions. So yeah, does it worry you? And then, is it one of the reasons the economies and the markets have stayed relatively stable? I mean, the stock markets, they haven't come off until recently. They've been making new highs this year.
Let's start with your war question. Either what NATO / America is doing is to create such a crisis that a form of settlement can be negotiated, or else it is actually planning for a physical attack. So what makes me side to the fact that it's going to be a physical attack on Russia is the bigger picture, which is that BRICS is now chairman, Russia is now chairman of BRICS. Russia sees 2024 as the optimum year to introduce BRICS' own currency, which will be based on the local currencies of BRICS, with gold probably replacing the dollar as the intermediary instrument. If that happens, then it's the start of America's hegemony and dollar-dominated world falling apart. Because BRICS members at the moment are only 10, accounting for, I've forgotten the exact figure, about 1/3 of global GDP. But within a very few years, that membership will be at least 40 countries, accounting for well over 50% of global population and GDP. So if that happens, then that is the end of the dollar US dominated world. They're not going to allow that to happen if they can stop it, which would mean even war. So I think that the likelihood of the following happening before the end of this year, and even before the end of August, is that there will either or both be war in Europe or a cyber attack on the G7 banking system, which will then have knock-on impacts on airline computers and electricity grid computers. So, not a nice outlook for the next 12 months. My bet is that it's more likely to be a cyber attack at the moment, but a cyber attack probably launched by G7's own intelligence services, who will then blame China and Russia because they want to shut the banks down in order to introduce central bank digital currencies. Question you have to ask: there was this big meeting, which I can't tell you where it was, earlier this month between NATO officials and their government representatives. And at that meeting, so I am told from one of our sources, is that plans to attack Russia were outlined. Why then did the UK Prime Minister suddenly and unexpectedly declare July the 4th for an election? He will have known what was said at that meeting.
So you think it could be after that July 4th?
Yes.
He doesn't want to be involved.
Yes.
You said that NATO and the US want to hit Russia physically. Would that be with nuclear weapons, or would that?
No, I don't think nuclear weapons. I think everything but, and Russia need not respond with nuclear. They've got hypersonic missiles, which can be just as destructive, but without the aftermath of a nuclear warhead.
Yeah, and we've seen recently that Macron, the president of France, said that NATO and the West should allow Ukraine to hit military targets in Russia. So I think that's how they're going to do it. They're going to use Ukraine to really hit Russia hard, and then I guess you think Russia will react by doing a cyber attack. And I say this because it will be our own
Oh,
intelligence, and they can use that as an excuse to reset the system, bring in CBDC. Yeah, that's very interesting. And I would say probably that Putin and the Russian leadership are probably aware of what's going on. So
oh, of course they are. Of course they are. Yeah.
they're not gonna
I
be
mean, you
triggered.
can see the statements that Lavrov has been making in the last few days.
Yeah, and so the second question was, do you think all the military spending that we're promising Ukraine and we've given to the Ukraine, not just in the US, but the West, do you think that's what's kept the economy going and the markets doing better than we thought they might be doing so far?
Well, I think a couple of things. First of all, the fiscal spending. Secondly, the markets, as history shows us, when we get into bubbledom, is complacency and greed takes over. It's not long-term capital that's driving the market higher. Long-term capital is probably exiting, but it's the short-term momentum speculative players. The key to all of this is if we knew where the old family monies were moving their funds to. It was the old family monies that backed Obama, and it's they who are also backing Biden. So where is that money being moved to? And in France, Macron is a Rothschild's guy. He would not be doing anything without the support of the family. Where are they shoving their money to?
Montenegro?
I wish I had the answer. Then we'd have the answer to everything.
Montenegro?
Huh?
Montenegro? I saw that the new Baron Rothschild, Nathaniel Rothschild, I was reading about him on Wikipedia. Nathaniel Rothschild. He's not called Lord anymore. I'm not sure why. Maybe they lost their. I think they changed the system in the House of Lords, but he's Baron. And guess what? He's got Montenegrin nationality. So you kind of wonder if they've got a lot of stuff stashed there.
Well, what I heard down the rumor vine is that the family is moving nearly all of their assets out of the UK, including very old real estate.
Maybe, do you think it could be to Argentina?
No idea.
I've heard over the years there's a lot of old money in Argentina,
I'm sure.
You
Yeah.
wonder with Millet, he came out as a libertarian, sound money guy and gold standard guy, and now you see him like meeting up with people like Clinton and others that you'd think, that doesn't make sense. But what do you mean by they're moving out their real estate, selling their real estate here and just moving the funds somewhere else, or?
If they're moving the real estate out, they must be quietly selling.
Yeah. And you're talking about the general election here in the UK was a surprise to everyone. He called it for the 4th of July. And you think it could be related to some kind of geopolitical event?
Well, I think one is only speculating because
Yeah,
one doesn't
yeah,
know. But he will have known what transpired at that NATO meeting earlier this month.
yeah. There was an announcement a week or so ago uh, by the UK government telling the general public they even got a website on how to prep. Uh, and
Yeah,
a lot of
that was actually part of what transpired at the NATO meeting, because originally the NATO guys, so I'm told the government representatives that they should tell their population to prepare for 72 months, 6 years. And all the government representatives said, impossible, impossible. So then it was cut down to 72 weeks. And again, the government guy said, impossible. So finally, they said 3 days, which is what the UK government came out and said.
Are you aware of other governments announcing this as well, or is it just the UK?
I was told that not openly, but quietly, some European governments have done the same, but not in an open forum.
So they just warned like the higher ups and not the general public.
Yeah.
So yeah, I want to move back to the markets a little bit, but before that, just wanted to ask you if I know this is not a dead certainty, but if something like this would happen, cyber attack and a war with Russia, is there really any safe place on the planet to go to?
I'm happy in Dubai.
Yeah, I'm happy here in London or the UK. I mean, the grass is always greener and better the devil you know. But yeah, it's interesting. So you think this could happen sometime in this like July, August?
I think before the end of September.
I see. So okay, let's move back to the market.
There's one consequence that should war break out, what will Japanese households do with their savings that are parked offshore? They will want to put their arms around their own cash. So you will see a flood, an exodus of money coming out of America and Europe. And what will that do to the carry trade? And what will then be the consequences? No wonder the banks will be shut down.
Yeah. So I guess in that situation, you don't want to have too much in the system in terms of
No.
investments. They could, perform this great taking that people have been talking about. So like the Japanese savers, the Mrs. Watanabes of the world, they'd be selling treasuries, gilts, European government bonds. That would be driving yields and interest rates higher. Hence,
Correct,
hence
correct,
all the banks failing, they have to close everything down.
correct.
So I guess you want to have some paper money stored away, and I guess also physical gold and silver, I would say.
You want four things: cash at home, precious metals, which I favor gold. Silver is a trading asset, gold is a secure asset. Food, because not only will food prices soar, but there will be a huge shortage of basic foods. And the fourth item is water, because your water supplies may well be cut off.
Yeah, and do you think here with the election in the UK, uh, maybe Sunak doesn't want to be a wartime prime minister, but
No,
maybe the
no,
maybe the powers that be think that it's better to have the Labour Party in because people are fed up with what the Tories have done in the last 14 years. And I say that not because I think Labour will do any better, but is that the way they see it, or it's just Sunak that really does? He probably wants. People say he wants to move to California and be safe over there.
I'm not so sure he would be safer over there, but that's a different question. I don't think he wants to. Well, I mean, I don't know. I would only guess. I mean, he knows what is coming, and he clearly doesn't want to run the country in a wartime situation.
There's an MP, Andrew Bridgen. He came out a week or two ago and he said, "Oh, we're already at war with Russia," which I thought was interesting. So,
Not too different from what Lord Cameron said.
what did Lord Greensill? What did he say, Simon?
Ah, well, he basically said uh, Ukraine can use all our missiles to fire directly into Russia. Well, that's tantamount saying we're at war.
It seems to me that this is being done on purpose, just to as a cover to bring down the whole monetary financial system, because these people they just seem crazy and incompetent to me.
I think what you're saying is got a lot of truth to it.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you what you thought about bond yields because since we last spoke, the 10-year yield has gone from below 4%. And I think today or yesterday it reached 4.63. You told us in the end of last year that you saw it going to 5.5, 5.75 in the first half of this year. So, or first quarter,
Well,
for
second half,
second half. Okay, yeah. So yeah, it looks like so it could be because of some kind of geopolitical situation because
and inflation.
yeah, that's right. And the other thing as well, Simon, I don't know if you heard this many years ago. Alan Greenspan once said that in times of extremists, in times of war and chaos, fiat currency is no good, and that you have to have gold.
Yeah, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, I think he was at the CFR, I think. Um, so let's end with gold and maybe a little bit of silver as well. I mean, my viewers, they like both. I know you prefer gold. I think gold is probably the best long-term store of value. Silver is more, like I said, trading. And also
Sure.
it could be used also when things hit the fan. if there is like some kind of close down of the whole banking system, how long do you think that could go for? And people could use old silver coins to barter.
I have no idea how long it could be, anything from weeks to months.
72 months.
No idea. But you make a very good point. I mean, friends of mine are saying that actually we are going to enter into a barter system. You won't want cash. You will barter a pound of flour for something you need.
Yeah, I think they did that in Germany after World War II
Yeah,
with
yeah.
the cigarettes. Yeah. So I guess as we wrap up here, Simon, maybe you could tell the viewers uh, something a little more rosy, how this scenario you describe, which I partly agree with, but what would be, is there any like
Yeah. Um,
any light at the end of the tunnel? Could this be scuppered? I guess maybe if
I
they decide to negotiate now with Putin, for example.
I think that we will have, looking at the rosy side, that we do have an escalation in the war, that we do have the closure of the banks for a couple of weeks to introduce central bank digital currencies, but that the system reopens and having had, well, let's step back a bit. I think that after the US election, the system will reopen. You have a new administration, hopefully, in the early months of 25. And that is when the Fed and other central banks throw everything into the system to prevent a systemic failure, which means that equity prices will double in value from their lows, say S&P at 3,000, going to probably around 7,000. Base metals will have had a very sharp fall, and the fall has begun, which will take, for instance, copper down to $6,500 by early next year. But we get the dates right, 25, 26. But by the end of 26 or early 27, we'll see copper at around 14,000 and the peaks in the equity markets. The problem then is that inflation will be soaring and long bond yields will be soaring with, for instance, the 10-year US Treasury at over 10%, enough to crash a highly indebted global system, which will then probably coincide with the breakout of the real war.
So that's the Rosy system. That's what you think would be the best.
That's the rosy system. The other scenario is that all of that happens in the second half of this year and early next year.
Yeah, and I guess that's to maybe prevent maybe even an election in the US, I guess. Would
Well,
that?
you'd have no election,
That's right. That's right. That's
which is what a number of people are saying. We need a war so that the current government can remain in office.
yeah, wartime president. That's right.
Wartime president, and what does the old money want? Doesn't want Trump, doesn't want anybody else. It wants the guy they can control.
Mm. All right. Simon, it was really interesting speaking with you today about what could be happening this year and in the next few years. So, do you want to tell the viewers where they can find your work?
Yeah, sure. The website is simon-hunt.com.
Great. Thank you, Simon, and I wish you a great rest of the day and a great coming weekend.
What weekend? Some of us don't have weekends.
Yeah, I know. Or bank holidays. All right.
And thank you. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Oh, you're welcome, and thank you.
Thank you, Mario.
Take care.
Cheers.
Cheers.